All right, so now we're going to talk about William Glasser, reality therapy, choice theory, and yeah. And if you have any questions at the end about how to apply it to the exam question, I'll be happy to answer those. Um, okay, so Bill Glasser, uh, I liked him. I met him quite a few times. One of the only theorists, the classical theorists that I've been able to meet because I was born just a little too late. Um, but uh, but he used to go to all the main conferences, ACA, APA, and I would either be presenting at the conference or um, or I had a table for one of my books. And and so uh, the different publishers have different tables, and it was always Glasser and his friend Wobelding, and they would have tables right next to each other. And so Glasser came up with these primary theories, and Wobelding was his good friend, and he came up with an organized way to use techniques with Glasser's theory, and he called that WDEP. And they were both like super nice guys. And even at conferences, like Glasser would wear the Hawaiian shirt that he must have had 100 Hawaiian shirts. I never saw him without one. And, you know, always pleasant and, but sarcastic. So I kind of like that in a nice way, not like in a Pearl's way, in a funny way. And, so, yeah. Uh, so let's talk a little bit about Glasser. He passed away in 2013, not that long ago. And so he had an interesting history. And I think his history really gives us an insight into how he created his theory. Um, but originally started out as a chemical engineer, turned to psychology and then psychiatry. And he was trained at the VA and UCLA in LA. So that's a lot of, yeah. But rejected Freud's theory right from the beginning and originated reality therapy in 1962. So his theory does go back pretty far, 1962. And so, you know, I think that he says that the basic premise of his theory is we are responsible for what we choose to do. Now, that sounds a lot like the basis of other theories as well. I mean, personal responsibility, that's very existential in nature, um, you know, but it goes into other theories as well. And so he says we're products of our past, but not victims in the present. So he really does have kind of that Adlerian concept of, yeah, well, the past happened. You know, we can't really make a lot of choices about what family we're born into or how we're affected by the world and like wars, things like that, poverty. Um, but uh, but we don't have to remain a victim in the present. We can make a choice to move forward in a positive direction, and and we can make choices. And so the theory's not very effective with like really young children. The book says that, but like by very young children, I'm thinking like preschool, because I use this theory with like elementary school kids. So like second or third grade is okay, I would say. Um, and it's really good for parents. So anytime you see a child, you should probably see the parents too. Uh, So they probably need counseling as well. Um, so he really promoted education, and he has a book, that includes that quite a bit, and worked with schools quite a bit. And just like Adler, he believed that success in school could help individuals overcome other issues. He consulted for several years with the Ventura School for Girls, California Youth Authority. That's like our Children Youth Authority, CYS. And, you know, I would say the age was like teenagers for that. And I would personally, I think this theory for me was most effective with teenagers. I used it all the time when I consulted with children and youth. And, you know, so it worked really well with teenagers who were a little rebellious and didn't want to go to counseling. And yeah, so I think one of the reasons it works for them is that they've heard so many adults say, do this, don't do that. And they feel as though they have no control over their lives. And this theory gives them control over their lives. So I think it's an empowering theory. And I think that's why teenagers like it. Um, so uh, let's see. Um, so let's kind of look at his theory. Um, he admits this. And, why wouldn't he? But this is kind of the shady part of his theory that, but every theory is like this. So he looked at control theory that was originated by a guy named William Powers. And this is what he says. This was later enhanced and renamed by Glasser as choice theory. Well, I'm sure William Powers was psyched, right? And come on. I I don't know. I think that's a little outrageous if you ask me. But so 1998, he published a book called Choice Theory, A New Psychology of Personal Freedom. Well, obviously, how new was it? You know? But that was 1998. And I think his reality therapy was fairly unique at the time, which was much, much earlier than that. He had a couple early books. One of the books was Reality Therapy. The second one had to do with schools. It was called Schools Without Failure. Um, and then the most, 1998 Choice Theory. And so when we talk about reality therapy, he says it's based on a combination of Glasser's earlier reality therapy and Powers control theory, both modified over time. And so this is kind of interesting. And at first, I don't know if I really bought into it. But now, like, I'm in my 50s and I totally buy into it. So I guess like life experience changes, you know, things, perception. And so one thing he says is that underlying problems of any emotional disorder are either the result of one of two things. The client does not have a relationship, and the client is involved in an unsatisfying relationship. He believed that everything is about relationship. And so, I wouldn't say every emotional disorder. I believe that a lot of emotional disorders are chemically based, I mean, that's just the way it is. So not, I wouldn't say the more severe disorders, but most of what people go to general counseling for. So I would say that, you know, Glasser kind of takes the extreme on these beliefs. So my reaction is, yeah, relationship is so important, you know? And so yeah, I think people need relationship in life. That's part of being human. And doesn't matter what kind of relationship, but we need other people in our lives. And so yeah, I agree with the importance of that, but I think there are more things that go into issues than just relationships. Um, like trauma. Okay? Maybe trauma is the result of a relationship. Um, but it might not be. Uh, and and chemical imbalances. So there's, you know, but he goes to the extreme with his beliefs. And you know, so reality therapy helps the client to behave in more effective ways, which facilitate more positive relationships. So here's the most extreme thing that he says. He wrote a book called Warning Psychiatry Can Be Hazardous to Your Mental Health. He did not believe in diagnosis. And I would say, you know, that I teach the DSM course. I'm somewhere in the middle. Like, I think that lots of individuals, excuse me, are overdiagnosed. There's lots of overdiagnosis. There's lots of over medication, especially in the US. Um, and I think that I don't want to place labels on people because now records are everywhere in every computer system, in every insurance company. And it's hard to escape a label nowadays. And so I don't like labeling people. And I think there is overdiagnosis, especially in the United States. And I think the reason for overdiagnosis is twofold. I think we rely too heavily on medication to solve our emotional issues. And I think that um, in Europe, they use a severity scale. What is the severity of these symptoms? And how are they affecting your life? And we don't tend to use severity scales in combination with the DSM. If they fit the symptomology, you get a diagnosis. Um, you can give every child under 10 multiple diagnoses if you don't use a severity scale. Um, and so, you know, he doesn't believe in the DSM. He doesn't believe in diagnosis. But so I don't like labels. I think there's overdiagnosis, especially with kids. I think that there's over medication. But on the other hand, I work in a psychiatric unit of a hospital and I see miracles every day because of medication and diagnosis. And it's basically changing people's lives. But these are severe cases. This is severe symptomology, and they are chemically imbalanced. And so, yeah, I think there's definitely a place for diagnosis. And there's definitely a place where there's some overdiagnosis. So I'm kind of in the middle personally. But he's not. And when he wrote this book, there was a lot of criticism. But one of the things they couldn't say is, what do you know? You're not a psychiatrist, because he is. So psychiatrists couldn't use that excuse. What do you know? You're not a psychiatrist. He says, yes, I am. And, you know, so it held a lot more um, weight than if he was not actually a psychiatrist, because he's talking about his own industry. And, but the one thing I did like about him is that he was always about therapy. He was never about medication. And that's one thing I really liked about him, because I don't think anybody should receive medication unless it's in combination with therapy. I think those two go hand in hand. And I think we should try therapy first and then, as a last resort, try medication. Um, so yeah, it's about that balance, everything's about balance. So he would actually, he wanted to empower people to the degree that if they change their language, it leads to a change in belief. So, you know, he would talk about depression, and somebody said, I'm depressed. Well, that's a passive phrase. It's like depression is happening to them. But he would say, I want you to say from now on, I am choosing to depress. That moves it from a passive, it's happening to me, to an active choice. And, you know, I think that once again, you know, I think there's a place for that, but I also think depression does happen to some people, you know. I've seen it. And so once again, it's about that middle ground, you know. But to make his point, I think he went all in, on one extreme. So if you look at his view of human nature, I think he took this right from Maslow's hierarchy, you know, and he thinks every human is born with five basic needs: survival, love and belonging, power, freedom, fun. Okay. So these are very similar to Maslow's needs, hierarchy of needs. And, you know, so let's just look at those five things, and we make choices in our lives to get these needs met. Okay. But sometimes those choices don't lead to getting the need met, or we think the need's met, and then we find out, nah, this really isn't that much fun. No, I really don't have that much power. Well, I thought I was finding love and belonging, but didn't work out. So there's lots of choices we make that we think are leading us to getting these needs fulfilled, but it ends up one or two of them are not being fulfilled. And those are some of the issues that he would talk about in therapy. So if we were looking at the case of Sam, okay, and we were looking at these five basic needs, which ones would Sam want fulfilled? If Sam made choices and they weren't working out for him, which of these do you think Sam needs some help with?
Love and belonging.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's the relationship that Sam wants, love and belonging. And career is an odd one because if it's a few things, um, I think the right career gives us a sense of maybe not power, like I don't want to feel powerful in my career, but I do want to feel empowered. I want to feel fulfilled. I want to have motivation. Uh, I want to feel like I made a choice and it's a good choice and I like my career and, you know, and, I think one of the things I talk about in career counseling is, and this is a weird one, but I think a career should help us to transcend our dichotomies. And that means really turning work into play. Like, how many Americans work 40, 50 hours a week and all they look forward to is the weekend? So they work, 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 work just for that 2 days weekend. And there's a vast difference between work and weekend. So they're working 5 days for 2 days of their life. And, the whole goal in career counseling is to transcend your dichotomies, to do something that you don't see as work anymore. You see it as kind of your passion. This is what you want to do with your life. And you find it fulfilling and you wake up and like, hey, I can't wait to go to work. Now, it might not be every day, but like so, you know, work should be a little bit fun, you know. Um, and so yeah, I think love and belonging definitely. Work's a weird one. I'm not going to be too critical about which one you choose for work, maybe multiple ones for work, but you need to choose something for career. And that's not being met, some need that's not being met. It could be power, could be survival. Like maybe, he's just working to survive, when in reality, he's not feeling empowered. He's not having enjoyment or fun in his work. So maybe he's meeting the wrong need with, his career. Yeah.
Quick
So
question. Can
we
we
need,
decide
yeah,
on, I was gonna say, could we address that on the exam? Like he's currently just using work to meet survival where it's missing fun or
yeah, that's why I'm telling you it. That is the answer to the exam. Yeah, good call. All right. Yeah. And, you know, you could also talk about this in part one, because it's kind of what brought him to therapy, you know? Um, so in remember, he has two issues. He's got the career and fulfillment, and he's got kind of wanting a healthy relationship. So there's two different needs. All right. So how does he address this with people? You know, well, people tend to make choices that don't work. And the weird thing is, we often keep making the same choice, even if something keeps not working. So let me give you an example. Like, how many times do people look for a certain type of person for a relationship? And every single time, the person's very similar, but it never works out. But they keep choosing the same type of person for the relationship. So, you know, that would be, maybe a little bit unhealthy, you know? Like, I don't know, for the first 30 years of my life, I dated musicians and they were usually from another country. And now, my wife doesn't play anything. And she's like, you know, local girl, wholesome, you know, she's crazy in a different way, but it works. All right. Um, maybe too much disclosure. But I had to address in my own life, why do I keep making the same choice and it never works out? What's going on with that? Okay. And I had to, kind of examine that. What's going on with that? You know? And so when we ask ourselves, what is a successful life? He thinks we have to have at least one successful relationship. And, you know, uh, I don't know what a successful relationship means exactly. I don't think it has to be like a lifelong marriage, but it could be any successful relationship in my mind. Like, I've had best friends twice as long as I've been married, and they've always been supportive, and we've been able to talk, and we've never lost contact. And I would say they were healthy relationships. I think they enhanced my life, and I grew from those relationships. And they were always a form of security. You know, I could always, I knew they'd be there for me, you know. So, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily like the lifelong romantic relationship. It could be, you know. Um, I mean, I think so. Like more personal disclosure, I think my perception of what a romantic relationship should be changed, and it moved from kind of like an unhealthy, crazy, fun, exciting thing to more of a friendship that grew into, a more significant relationship. So, all right. Let's see. All right. So what would therapy look like? What would happen in the session? Okay. So we help the client just talking with them about this, and we'd identify those he would call them frustrated needs, but it's needs that haven't been met. Okay. And we'd pick one of them. Okay. And you know, and we talk about some choices, that maybe they've made in the past that didn't work out. So with Sam, we could say, okay, well, and we bring up his dad in the beginning. We're not talking about dad in the session because he's an adult. He's 30 years old. He's making his own decisions now. But he made a lot of choices that might have felt safe or correct. And I meet so many clients that do this. And like not only families, but society kind of teaches us, oh, get a good job, make a lot of money, buy a big house, get a cool car, whatever. But I meet so many people like around midlife that have been extremely successful. And they're like, I thought by following, what society told me to do, that I'd be happy and fulfilled by now. So they worked hard, you know, they spent hours in their business. They rose up the ladder. They became financially successful. They got the big house. They got the cool car, you know, and yet once they got to that point, they were extremely depressed because it's not what they expected. They expected fulfillment and happiness once they got to that point. And then around midlife, they're thinking, wow, not only am I not fulfilled and not happy, but I'm depressed. And now I only have so much of my life left. How do I want to spend the rest of my life? That's why they call it a midlife crisis. We finally realize we're mortal. So, and then people begin to realize, wow, you know, I need I need to go to counseling. I need to figure some things out. I don't want to just do this for the rest of my life. I want to find some fulfillment and meaning and happiness. So, you know, that's one of the frustrated needs and choices that went into it. And, you know, and so, okay, well, if those choices didn't work for you, maybe you need to make different choices. What would those different choices look like? What would those new goals be? What would the new needs look like if, you know, you're doing okay in business, Sam, but you're not happy. You're not fulfilled. So, you know, what would a fulfilling career look like to you? And then what different choices would you need to make to get to that more healthy need? So that's kind of what happens to people. People think they're fulfilling a need, but it's not a healthy need. Like their vision of that need isn't healthy. And so they make poor choices to get to the unhealthy need. And they meet that unhealthy need, but, they're not happy. It's a frustrated need. And so we kind of have to go in two directions in the session. We figure out what needs not being fulfilled and what would a healthy, what would that, if that need was healthy, what would that look like for you? And then what choices that are different from your old choices, what new choices would you need to make in order to get to this different healthy need and find it fulfilling? That's kind of like the discussion you would have. Okay. All right. And you know, so the next thing is kind of like it's a little confusing. So it's called the quality world. And this is kind of the place in our minds where we store memories of things or actions that make us feel good. So this could be good or could be problematic. Okay. Drugs make us feel pretty good, but they're probably not healthy. Um, you know, buying things is the same as a drug. It gives us a little rush, chemical rush in our minds when we buy things. But people don't realize that we actually create the same chemicals when we give things. It's just a little more healthier than buying things. So some things we might have in the quality world in our minds and might not be healthy. But so we usually address that in therapy. When we're talking about frustrated needs, we kind of address, all right, what kind of things are in that quality world that all those goals you want to fill, are they healthy? Are you going to find them healthy and fulfilling in the end? And if not, we might want to help the client change some of those quality world items as well. But let's say we went through all that. One thing that Glasser says is that in order to have a healthy therapeutic relationship, one of the steps is for the client to be able to place you in their quality world as a therapist. I would say that's building a therapeutic relationship in trust. He would say he wants to be part of the client's quality world, like therapy is a positive, a healthy thing. It's pretty much the same thing. So, um, there's a thing I used to go over kind of this car metaphor. I don't even like it anymore. I'll probably delete that from the notes. Um, okay. So he does try to keep things in the present, as most therapists do. Um, so he says the past can't be changed. So he doesn't talk about the past. I mean, he gets a case history, he figures out frustrated needs. But for the rest of therapy, he wants to talk about what's going on in the present and the future. And so, you can't change the past. And at some point, we have to take responsibility for ourselves in the present and move forward in a healthy direction. And that means making good choices for us. He'll even use an example of abuse. And, my take on that is I've worked for years with trauma and abuse. And yeah, we process everything. I don't negate it. That's not what he's saying. We have to we have to deal with that issue, that trauma. But after many, many sessions, after the client has processed everything, I think there usually comes a time when we have to discuss remaining in the past as a victim or making a choice to no longer be a victim and move forward in a healthy and positive direction. That usually has to be a conscious choice. It's a difficult thing. Yeah. All right. Um, he really doesn't talk about symptoms or diagnoses or anything like that. So let's talk about the techniques. So you're going to discuss all that with the needs and choices and everything in the therapy session in that, second part. But then you have to apply a technique, okay? And the name of the technique is WDEP. All right. And um, So WDEP. W stands for wants and needs. What are our wants and needs? So, like, remember, we talked about frustrated needs, okay, and healthy needs, and what direction we're taking, and what are we doing to get that need met, and, evaluating the progress and planning and commitment. And so, uh, Wobelding gave me all the handouts for WDEP. And you go past the notes and past the William Glasser Institute, and you will find Wobelding's handouts on WDEP. Okay. Now, his handouts, this was his thing. He went into great detail, like many sub steps for each letter of WDEP. Okay. But you don't have to for this exam. You just deal with those four letters, WDEP, and kind of address maybe W and D in the session, and then E and P in the third part in the treatment plan. Okay, so we're going to discuss WND in the session, and they're going to try it out. And then we're going to do some evaluation and, um, you know, some other things. So, it doesn't all have to be done in the session. You can do all four letters if you want in the session. It's okay. It's up to you. You can do WDEP in the session and then in the treatment plan. So maybe you're talking about career in the session. In the treatment plan, go through everything in the treatment plan for the other issue, relationships. And that will give you a lot to talk about for the treatment plan, frustrated need of love and belonging and poor choices and what does a healthy relationship look like and what are the new choices and doing WDEP with that issue. And that's your treatment plan for part three. So, um, and you could actually just read what he says under WDEP and kind of include some of those things, not all of them, some of those things to talk about in the session with Sam. So I tried to kind of, as I explain this theory, I tried to apply it to Sam. But I want to know, what questions you have about the theory or the exam as far as Glasser and that question on the exam. And it's okay if you don't have any. All right.